And thank you all for joining us today for what I hope is going to be a really both informative and also, dare I say, inspiring conversation about plans for innovation, innovation that is desperately needed in this moment in our democracy. And so before we start that conversation and hearing from both Paige and Omar, we thought we would do a quick temperature check. Sarah is going to, if she hasn't already, dropped a quick link in the chat for a tool called Menti. It's just a simple link that if everyone will click on, even if you're on your phone and are viewing from the phone, the link should still work and you can use it on your phone. And it asks a simple question. What is one word to describe how you're feeling about our democracy right now? And so just by way of, again, checking and seeing how folks are feeling, if you could just drop in a single word, the first word that comes to mind. Your name is not going to be attributed to this, but drop in a word to describe how you're feeling about our democracy right now. And in a second, we'll actually be able to see, again, with no attribution, to get a sense of how folks are feeling, and you'll be able to actually see in real time some of the responses. So again, the link is in the chat. It should work on both laptop and phone, and all you got to do is enter your word and submit it. Sarah, why don't you go ahead and pull up the screen so we can see what words are starting to come in for folks? Yeah, sounds about right. For those who may be on a phone and can't see the visual, some of the words that have come in are concerned, fragile, pessimistic, hopeless, frightened, nervous, lost, unsettled, angry. Yeah. These are about right. I'm going to give another second or two. If there are any words or sentiments here that are not reflected, please add them. You all know how word clouds work, right? The larger the word, the more people we know are feeling that same way. And I think this is pretty accurate for the moment that we're in. But I also believe that those of us who are on this call are here because even if we don't feel it at the surface today, we have some sense of hope or some sense at the very least that it is worth our effort to respond to this moment and to not let this moment last forever, right? That there are things that we can do, even if we feel like we're not exactly sure what they are. We're here to hear from some folks today, from Omar and the team at Innovating, who do have some ideas, some what I think are pretty brilliant ideas for how we move forward in response to this concern and this fear and this nervousness and this anxiety that I think has overtaken so many of us in this moment. Thank you, Sarah. You can go ahead and remove it from the screen. So for the rest of our time together, you're going to hear from Paige, who is going to give some context for today's conversation, then turn it over to Omar, who's going to share his plans and vision for innovating for the public good. As Sarah said, there is a Q&A function that we're going to ask you to use throughout the presentation. You all will be able to see all the questions. You can upvote them. After Omar finishes, I'm going to do my best to kind of categorize some of them and ask maybe one or two that captures a lot of the themes that we're seeing. And then we're going to allow a few of you to be able to ask questions voice to voice. You will not be able to be on camera, although I'm sure some of you appreciate that. You don't have to be on camera. But we will open up so that you're going to be able to actually ask a question or two at the end. So again, throughout the presentation, though, we do encourage you to use the Q&A function. I will present some of those questions to Omar, and then we'll open up for you all to raise your hand and be able to call on just a couple to be able to pose a question to him directly. So without further ado, I certainly, like you all, am feeling anxious and ready to hear and to discuss some solutions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Paige, who's going to set the context for Omar's presentation today.
Thanks, Erica. I think as the word cloud noted, our country is really being torn apart, and democratic norms and rules are being shattered every day. We have a president who bends and breaks the rules and breaks the law, and a compliant Congress and a more compliant Supreme Court lets him get away with it. This administration, let's be clear, will do anything to obtain more power to advance its goals. This is not just about Donald Trump, though. His time in office will end, thankfully. But the forces that carried him into the White House will not. The harm that is being done to our country and those who live in it will be hard to repair, much less reverse, to realize a better, more just future. Our only hope is to rethink our strategies and approaches. Many of you know 25 years ago, I started the Voter Participation Center and its affiliate, the Center for Voter Information. These organizations were based on innovation, experimentation, and rigorous evaluation. The idea was to expand the electorate. It succeeded in increasing registration rates and turnout rates and civic participation among unmarried women, young people, and persons of color. However, what became clear to me was we could increase registration, we could increase turnout, we could win elections because of our efforts, but we were not really building long-lasting power. Exactly the opposite. Everyday Americans were losing power. And our constitutional rights were being chipped away slowly and now more rapidly. So our focus was on elections and to solve the problem, as well as movement politics to advance justice, but neither were up to the task we're facing now. So you may agree or disagree with this analysis, but I think there's one thing we can all agree on. We cannot operate today as if all the normal rules, the once normal rules of the game, apply. So our approach must be different, and our programs must seek to address the cause and not just the symptoms of our crumbling democracy. So our programs must be short-term challenges, the ones that are so grave that face us every day, while building for the long term. For those and other reasons, I started and founded Innovating for the Public Good, R&D for Democracy. It was time to bring together a group of people with different subject matter expertise to spark an effort that takes a holistic approach to address the foundational challenges we face. The Trump administration has demonstrated just how fragile our democracy is and how weak the guardrails are. It's also apparent that power at any cost is their goal, and the weakness of Democrats in the face of this have been exposed, leaving voters really no place to go. So no one organization obviously can address the magnitude of the problems and the failures of the public sector. But IFPG will do something that's different. No other organization has created a center for innovation and focused solely on the foundational forces of our democracy's demise, both short-term threats and long-term solutions, and bringing success to scale is the work of Innovating for the Public Good. As many of you know, this new effort has been percolating in my brain for a while. And so to lead this effort and realize the ambitious goals, we turn to a new generation of leadership. So I'm thrilled that Omar Parbhoo has accepted the role of the first Chief Executive Officer. Omar beforehand was the Managing Director of Civic Engagement at Ideas 42, a really brilliant shop where he leveraged behavioral science to promote inclusive and sustained civic participation across the United States. His history and background are as an insightful innovator and a seasoned manager makes Omar the perfect choice for this ambitious endeavor. With your help and support, Innovating is bound under Omar's leadership to succeed beyond our wildest dreams. Omar.
Thank you, Paige. I really appreciate that welcome, and excuse the zoom of my camera while I get my screen up. All right, so thank you all for joining. It is really such a pleasure to have all of you here today. And just to reiterate, we're going to have Q&A at the end, but I really would recommend that if you have any questions that come up as I'm talking, please put it into the box as they arise, and we will make sure to address those. You know, I was just thinking about that word cloud we saw and the sense that so many of us share that our democracy is broken. There's a real and understandable urgency to find some quick wins that will reverse this decline. But time is also running out for us to repair the deeper challenges that we're facing as a country. The good news that I'll be sharing today is that we have a clear picture of what those deep foundational challenges are. And I'll share more about them shortly. But what I want to communicate is what matters is that we're meeting the right problems with bold solutions. And that's exactly what IFPG is here to do. We're running an R&D lab to unlock the kind of breakthroughs that can repair the foundation of our democracy and set it on solid ground for generations to come. So let me jump in. Like we've seen, it's clear to all of us here that our democracy is rapidly eroding in a wide range of ways. Trust is collapsing, communities are fraying, and people are losing faith that our institutions and even our neighbors can solve real problems. In this environment, we see people retreating to their camps. We see polarization deepening on multiple fronts, and we see authoritarian appeals resonating in disturbing ways. People are drawn to the false promise of order in a system that often feels chaotic, unresponsive, and out of reach. But we didn't arrive at this point overnight, and we definitely aren't here by accident. As many of you know, for decades, people intent on concentrating power have played the long game. You may recognize on the screen the Powell memo that became a blueprint for protecting corporate interests and much more. This type of thinking inspired a relatively small group of people to invest in shaping narratives, winning state legislatures, elevating judges, and building a media ecosystem that normalized their worldview. I don't often quote Andrew Breitbart, but he famously said that politics is downstream of culture. And in many ways, he was right. For too long, a culture that undercuts democratic values and practices has run rampant. But we can't treat the current state of affairs as inevitable. Let me take a moment to share a little bit more about my background. I'm an immigrant, and until very recently, I would say without hesitation that I am American. And more importantly, no one doubted that I was just as American as someone whose family had been here for generations. When I first arrived at a young age, I lived in a suburb in southern Louisiana that was very homogenous. But I was welcomed with open arms, and I could see that my neighbors proudly viewed me and my family as a demonstration of the great promise of America. That feels like a very far cry from where we are today. That pride has been replaced with suspicion and cruelty. Why? Because that suspicion and cruelty is being cultivated. We are here by design, and we can design our way out of it. Now imagine what it would look like if we reclaim that power, but in service of a thriving, inclusive democracy. A society where divisions are replaced with a sense of shared belonging, collective responsibility is valued alongside individual rights, and people believed they had the power to shape the world around them. That future is possible if we put in the work. Now, I want to take a moment to recognize that across the country, amazing organizations are fighting to make this future a reality. But even the best efforts are often siloed or operating on a short time horizon tied to election cycles. What we need is a holistic plan and the ability to innovate around it. Otherwise, we'll never be able to overcome the challenges of this moment. We recently conducted a pretty comprehensive landscape analysis of the pro-democracy space and found a lot to feel inspired by. But we're not doing enough to deal with the fundamental threats our country is facing. Many of the organizations we examined are focused on tactical improvements to existing strategies. And where there is innovation, it's typically limited to short-term election work rather than addressing the deeper fissures in our democracy. We need an all-of-the-above strategy. Transformative change happens when we design for it, invest in it, and build the systems to make it durable. So I've mentioned multiple times that we need to focus on fundamental problems. And what I'm hoping to convey is that we can significantly move the needle in the short term and long term when we tackle the core challenges that are keeping the current system afloat. Often our attention is focused on the visible features above the surface that rightly give us a lot of dread, like polarization or authoritarian backsliding. But these features are symptoms of beliefs and conditions that run much deeper. We've been mapping out those conditions and beliefs, and based on years of research that we and many others have done, we've been able to home in on the most fundamental areas that need to be addressed to revitalize our democracy. So let me end the suspense and get specific here. We're centering our work on three interconnected forces. Those are othering, fatalism, and hyper-individualism. Othering fuels zero-sum thinking and turns neighbors into adversaries. Fatalism convinces people that the system is rigged and nothing they do will make a difference. So why not tear it all down? And hyper-individualism leaves people isolated, believing problems are theirs alone to solve. These forces feed disconnection, distrust, and disengagement. Until we address these forces head on, even the best efforts will fail to add up to durable change. To bring this point home, I've mapped out how these forces are contributing to some of the recent issues we've been experiencing. We can draw clear lines from othering, fatalism, and hyper-individualism to things like anti-immigrant fervor, or low voter turnout, or attacks on DEI. When we understand and reverse these trends, we then start building the conditions for a pluralistic democracy that people actively support and participate in. So how do we even start on something this massive? Well, there are many examples of Americans doing the near impossible when we set our minds and our resources to it. That's the idea behind building a next-gen R&D lab for democracy, a place that draws talent and knowledge from across sectors to run impact-driven research grounded in our core challenges and foster cutting-edge development with an eye towards scale. When we have a clear vision of our goals and set the right conditions for innovation, we can unlock the kind of breakthroughs we need. We've seen this story many times over. There's nothing inherently innovative about the private sector, nor are areas like the government antithetical to cutting-edge thinking. But in both cases, we've seen successive breakthroughs happen when someone made the choice to invest in R&D. From companies that use research to drive entire industries to national labs that reshape the frontier of technology, the lesson is clear. Innovation must be cultivated. For 8 years, I built and ran a civic innovation shop at a behavioral science firm. When we defined the heart of a problem, created space for risk-taking, and collaborated with people from a wide range of fields, we built the most novel and effective solutions, many of which we spun out as standalone products. I want to expand that work to the deeper challenges our country is experiencing today. We need to bring true R&D to our democracy so we can take big swings and achieve tangible results, both in the long term and in the short term. No area of American life is more in need of bold innovation, so we have to do this. So to unpack our approach to research and how it differs from what's out there already, we start with a clear sense of what our goals are. We're shaping a culture that helps people believe in a democracy that works for them by reversing the core challenges we've identified. I recognize that tackling a force like othering feels like an impossibly large undertaking, but I would argue that trying to strengthen our democracy without addressing these fundamental problems is the more quixotic approach. And the reality is that when we take a holistic view of the underlying conditions behind these forces and how intensely they impact how people behave, we can identify points of leverage that drive meaningful impact, even in the short term. But these points of leverage need to be thought of in a larger context. Interventions in isolation, no matter how good they are, can change the course of our democracy. We need to be intentional about the ecosystem we're building and how solutions can and should reinforce one another. With an evidence-based plan, we can start laying the groundwork for transformative change. Now, I also want to recognize the limitations of trying to orchestrate anything this large. We can't anticipate every challenge. We can't identify every solution. But a blueprint does allow us to prioritize where change is needed the most, spot bottlenecks that must be addressed, and coordinate efforts across stakeholders. All of this is sorely needed in the current environment. So let me highlight some work we're already doing to deepen our understanding of the core challenges and to create a plan to address them. Here you see research we recently conducted to map out the mechanics of othering. Along with Hart Research and PSG Consulting, we surveyed almost 2,700 registered voters to directly understand how people view themselves relative to others and what's driving divisions, and also what's potentially uniting us. We were able to quantify, fortunately, a pretty grim picture. Across the board, voters felt like their in-group was losing power. You would imagine that if this were based on an objective sense of reality, you would see winners and losers. But in the rhetoric of our politics today, everyone is casting themselves as the aggrieved. But there are some pockets of hope. When we dig deeper, we see generational differences that suggest the narrative of othering doesn't land equally with everyone. Younger voters are less likely to buy into ideas that pit groups against one another. Instead, they're much more focused on issues like racial justice, immigration rights, and women's equality. We also see a similar story playing out with Trump's deportation agenda. Outside of his base, support collapses. And among young voters, it's overwhelmingly rejected. These data tell us that the appeal of othering has limits. I mean, without a doubt, the rhetoric is potent when amplified, but it's also fragile when confronted with values of fairness, inclusion, and belonging. Understanding how to leverage the opportunities here without exacerbating the rhetoric is the trick. But that's a foundation we can build on. Another project we're excited about is called Deep Audience Understanding. There is no shortage of work out there slicing and dicing the electorate. But despite that, we are regularly surprised by who Americans are and what moves them. Maybe it's because we aren't asking the right questions. Let's take a recent example. A major platform of the last presidential election, especially for the Democrats, was protecting democracy. The alarm bells were rung constantly. The specter of Project 2025 was used to make clear what was at stake. And for the most part, Americans were feeling the dread looming over our country. When we look at surveys, we see that the numbers bear this out. In an October survey by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, 81% of likely voters believe that democracy was under threat. And in an AP survey, when respondents were asked which of the presidential candidates were most committed to democracy, 48% of respondents said Kamala Harris, and only 28% said Donald Trump. That's a big gap. So what happened? Obviously, there are a lot of reasons why survey results don't translate into actual votes. For one, voters have very different opinions about what's really threatening democracy. Also, even if someone was concerned for the right reasons, protecting democracy may not outrank things like economic issues when people are deciding who to vote for and why. But in the retrospectives of the last election, one consistent theme emerged, and that was when Democrats pitched the need to defend our democracy and our democratic institutions, a lot of people heard a defense of the status quo. For those who feel that the system is rigged and want to blow it all up, that's a no-go. To me, this speaks to the need to understand where people are on the more fundamental issues, like fatalism in this case. And we want to do just that. We're setting up a multidisciplinary group to scope out a project where we'd be integrating market analysis techniques, behavioral science, values research, and other methods to build a more complete picture of how people engage with democratic values and what truly drives actions. Major companies do this all the time when they want to understand how consumers are viewing and engaging with their products. They deploy high precision techniques to determine the value of their products, what they're delivering, and to whom they're delivering that value. And then they target their messaging appropriately to capture a larger share of the market. They also learn if and how to update their products to better serve their potential customers. We shouldn't hesitate to deploy these best-in-class techniques for the sake of our democracy. And if we're clear on what the quote-unquote product is, in our case, selling the foundational pro-democracy values, then this type of work can be the jumping off point for a wide range of interventions, messaging campaigns, and other efforts that will strengthen our country from the ground up. Okay, so we talked about our impact-oriented research, but how do we make the jump from insights to solutions? At IFPG, we're setting ourselves up to be a launch pad for transformative breakthroughs, a place to cultivate ideas that get to the heart of the core challenges we face. We know that identifying, testing, and scaling solutions is a tall order. So what we've done is set up a multi-pronged approach to give us different avenues for innovation. Specifically, we're generating breakthroughs in-house with our Center for Innovation. We're also putting out calls for bold new ideas through a prize competition. And where there is market potential, we'll be incubating promising efforts that align with our roadmap. Lastly, we're investing in new metrics and rigorous evaluation to make sure that on all fronts, we stay on track and pivot when needed. So for the sake of time, let me zoom in on the first two approaches. First, our Center for Innovation. It will be the hub for kickstarting new ideas and rapidly generating early stage solutions. We'll identify promising areas of research or bottlenecks in our efforts to strengthen democracy and direct attention, talent, and resources to those areas. Part of the magic here is pulling in expertise from a variety of sectors around a single idea. These will be our creative councils that we'll set up to develop and shepherd specific initiatives. We'll also work closely with technical partners in tech, marketing, and other spaces to build out promising solutions with top talent that may not normally be working in the civic domain. Finally, we'll host innovation fellows. These fellows will be people who have cutting edge ideas that need a home to grow them in. All right, and speaking of supporting cutting edge ideas, we don't need to do everything in-house. We do, however, want to encourage more people to innovate around the high leverage areas that we've identified. One powerful way to do that is with a prize competition that has a well-scoped problem statement coupled with risk-tolerant capital. We think this would help us cast a wide net for good ideas and could unlock bold solutions from surprising places. We'd also encourage cross-sector collaboration by elevating submissions that have teams from different sectors. This push to broaden teams could bring in new thinking to problems that, frankly, we've been struggling with. Lastly, we know that these kind of prizes spark work beyond just the prize winners. The process of applying itself can prompt new bodies of work. So we see this as a way of catalyzing a range of solutions. All right, the good news is that some of this work is already coming together. So let me provide one last example of a project that we're hoping to kick off soon. It's clear that we need better infrastructure to shape pro-democracy narratives year-round. Often we turn up the volume on the narratives around election time and we frame the solution as candidate Y winning over candidate Z. I think we're selling democracy short by doing things this way. The Continuous Narrative Initiative is building an always-on, values-driven communication system that keeps truth, trust, and belonging at the center of the public conversation. That means we're doing this every day, not just during moments of crisis or during election season. Now, changing narratives and mindsets is hard work, so it can't be a piecemeal effort. We need to create structures that reinforce core messages and provide ample demonstrations of key pro-democracy tenets. The current president is extremely skillful at doing this. He latches onto a message, he gets his allies to amplify it, and then creates a reality that reinforces that message. For example, when he claimed protests in LA were out of control, right-wing media gave that idea oxygen. And then Trump sent the National Guard into the city under those false pretenses. Finally, he used the presence of the National Guard as a proof point for his initial claim. Sadly, or rather fortunately, we can't replicate that playbook. And I've seen tit-for-tat reactive efforts fall desperately short. But we can shape narratives if we invest in the right storytelling, uncover the most effective messages and messengers, and reach people where they are over and over again. I think the good news is that when we decouple narratives that deepen belonging, trust, and agency from politicized messaging, they have broad appeal. Over time, we can establish the narrative infrastructure needed to compete with authoritarian messaging, amplify shared values, and sustain a healthier civic culture. All right, before I end my presentation, let me just make the case for why this work is so critical to do right now. In so many ways as a country, we're at a breaking point. Economically, we're experiencing record inequality. And with the policies of this administration, that gap is widening rapidly. We're also seeing corruption going unchecked and the uber wealthy capturing more power, which further deepens the sense that our economy is rigged. On the political side, our institutions are less trusted than ever, and the political distortion is hard to ignore. In the middle of the slide is a graph from Adam Bonika's Substack. It shows that federal district courts have ruled against the administration over 94% of the time. But when the Supreme Court weighs in, they side with the president in nearly 99% of the cases. Whatever side you're on, this unevenness in our justice system should worry you. And there's the impending impacts of AI on our society. We don't know the full contours of that impact, but I don't think we're prepared for it. All of this and the other issues are spilling over and have deepened the sense of fatalism, othering, and individual retreat. We're seeing this culminate in terrible ways. Just take the political assassination of Charlie Kirk last week and the Minnesota lawmakers earlier this year. And then there was the killing of the CEO of United Healthcare, the very disturbing ambivalent response to that murder. People are fed up, which is scary. But I would argue there's an opportunity there. We're all clamoring for something different and hopefully better. If we invest in a culture that supports connection, agency, and collective power, I think we will find a captive audience. We have the rare chance to channel the frustrations of today into a new positive vision for our democracy and our country. But if we let the worst elements continue unchecked, the future will remain bleak.